Let's get right into it. In this explainer, we're unpacking a really fascinating logical puzzle about the legal mechanics of ancient food prohibitions. We aren't just looking at a simple rulebook here. We're examining a text that forces us to rigorously test the foundation of a law, step by step, until we hit a flawless logical proof. Basically, we're going to explore the legal status of extracted liquids.
To set the stage, let's picture a totally practical, everyday dinner table scenario. Imagine you're holding a piece of fruit, and under Torah law, you are strictly forbidden to eat it. Pretty straightforward, right? But what happens if you squeeze that fruit? Is the juice that comes out equally forbidden? It seems like a no-brainer yes, but the ancient legal minds we're studying today didn't just accept a simple yes. They demanded precise, airtight, textual proof for every single assumption.
Since this logical derivation is highly sequential, here's our roadmap. We're going to cover liquids from prohibited foods, the human intervention distinction, deriving from first fruits, deriving from the priestly portion, unique legal stringencies, and finally, combining those legal sources.
All right, Section 1, Liquids from Prohibited Foods. Let's look at the base rule for forbidden liquids right out of the gate.
The source text lays down a very clear, sweeping rule across 5 distinct categories of prohibited foods. Whether we're talking about untithed produce, new crop grain, consecrated produce, sabbatical year produce, or diverse kinds, like, say, a vineyard where grains were improperly planted, the Torah law is exactly the same. The liquid that comes out of them is just as prohibited to drink as the solid produce is to eat. Literally, liquid equals solid in the eyes of the law. But, in this highly analytical system, just stating a rule is never enough. We actually have to prove where it comes from.
And that search for proof brings us to Section 2, the human intervention distinction. This is where the real legal stress testing starts.
Right away, we hit a massive categorical divide. The text argues, wait, we can't just lump all these prohibitions together because their underlying mechanics are totally different. Think about it. Things like untithed produce or new crop grain, they develop their prohibited status completely on their own, naturally just by growing. But consecrated produce? That is a whole different ballgame. It uniquely requires a human being to step in and actively declare it holy. It requires human intervention. Because of that, we can't just derive the liquid rule for consecrated produce from those naturally occurring prohibitions.
So here's the crucial question. We've got to find a legal source that perfectly matches this required element of human intervention. We essentially need a template to prove that the juice of consecrated produce is forbidden. Where do we find that?
Well, that brings us to Section 3, deriving from first fruits. Here, the text attempts to use a very specific category as our template. The text suggests, hey, let's derive the rule from the Torah laws governing first fruits. By definition, first fruits perfectly match what we're looking for. They don't just happen naturally, they demand active human intervention. A human owner literally has to intentionally set them aside from the harvest and physically bring them to the temple.
But to actually use first fruits as our template, we first have to prove that its liquids are legally treated just like its solids. By analyzing a specific verse from Deuteronomy, the text zeroes in on the phrase, which you shall bring in from your land. Ancient scholars looked at this seemingly extra phrasing and interpreted it to teach that if a farmer pressed his first fruit grapes into wine, he could bring that wine to fulfill his obligation. Boom! This definitively proves that when it comes to first fruits, a liquid, like wine, legally equals the solid fruit.
But this brilliantly illustrates our first major logical roadblock. See, while first fruits do share that human intervention element, they also come with these incredibly unique, severe stringencies that consecrated produce simply doesn't have. For example, bringing first fruits requires reciting the specific wandering Aramaean declaration, and it requires physical placement inside the temple. Because first fruits have these heavy, unique burdens, we can't use them as a general template. The logic just falls apart, so we have to abandon this route.
Hitting a wall there, let's move to Section 4, deriving from priestly portion, and see if the text can find another way around this.
The text pivots and decides to test the priestly portion as our potential source. Just like consecrated produce, separating the priestly portion requires a human being's active declaration. And practically speaking, this was a massive dinner table issue back in ancient times. If you have grapes or olives that belong to the priestly portion, non-priests are strictly forbidden to eat them. But what if you squeeze those forbidden grapes into wine, or mash those olives into oil?
Well, interestingly enough, the text proves that the liquids of the priestly portion are absolutely forbidden to non-priests.
And it does this by establishing a direct textual link right back to the first fruits, drawing on shared phrasing in Deuteronomy. Okay, so we've established that the priestly portion requires human intervention, and its liquids are forbidden. So can we finally use it as the template for consecrated produce?
Actually, scratch that. Not quite yet. This brings us to Section 5, Unique Legal Stringencies, which is basically the ultimate stress test.
Here's the massive roadblock that derails our derivation all over again. Both the first fruits and the priestly portion carry an incredibly severe punishment under Torah law. If a non-priest consumes them, they face death at the hand of heaven, plus a mandatory 20% financial fine. Consecrated produce, though, it carries neither of these heavy penalties. Because the priestly portion is so much stricter, we simply can't use it to prove a rule for the much more lenient category of consecrated produce.
At this point, the text really pushes the limits of logic. It asks, well, what if we combine both first fruits and the priestly portion to create a sort of super category? Could that be our template? But synthesizing them reveals exactly why that fails too. They both share that extreme severity, the heavenly death penalty and the fine. Any combined derivation is instantly thrown out by that shared, overwhelmingly strict characteristic. We are completely stuck.
So how do we get out of this? Let's move to Section 6, combining the legal sources, and see how this complex puzzle finally resolves. The final resolution here is an absolute masterpiece of legal synthesis. It takes two completely disparate laws and combines them to isolate the exact properties we need. Step 1, we take the rule for the priestly portion, which gives us that absolutely crucial element of human intervention. But to neutralize that heavy penalty roadblock, Step 2 brings in a completely different Torah law, the law regarding dissolved leavened bread on Passover. Now, dissolved leavened bread is a case where the liquid is forbidden, but crucially, it doesn't carry the specific penalty of death at the hand of heaven for a non-priest. By combining the characteristics of the priestly portion with the characteristics of dissolved leavened bread, they effectively cancel out each other's unique stringencies. And Step 3? We are left with the perfectly isolated, flawless legal proof that the liquid of consecrated produce is just as forbidden as the produce itself.
This incredible analytical breakdown takes what could be a simple yes or no question about squeezed fruit and turns it into an absolute masterclass in legal reasoning. It leaves us with a really provocative thought. If ancient scholars required this level of deep, categorical logic to build the very foundation of everyday dietary laws, how does mapping out these rigorous mechanics change how we view the logic behind the rules we interact with in our own lives today? Thank you for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this deep dive has sparked your curiosity to look a little closer at the frameworks around us.